Dario, could you please share with us the legal implications of the new regulations that was passed last week in terms of fake news and also what we are currently now experiencing in terms of the 21-day nationwide lockdown?
Yes, certainly. Well, COVID-19, of course, has presented a major challenge to governments around the world, to say the least. And the declaration of COVID-19 as a national disaster means that the government can take extraordinary measures to what would otherwise be a case of limiting people's rights and freedom of trade, right to privacy, right to association, right to freedom of expression. All of those rights can be limited, of course, as we know, in our democracy, but certainly in the case of a national disaster or national state of emergency, we're in the former category, there can be limitation on those rights, provided the limitation is reasonable and rational and justifiable. Now, the limitation that I am focusing on is the restriction that was published last week on the publication of fake news about COVID-19. Ordinarily, that would be an egregious freedom of expression issue. But of course, given the important societal objective, government objective in preventing fake news about the disease, which is very dangerous and which can, in fact, harm people's lives and create a danger for public safety, it seems to me that the government had a rational reason to enact the law through the government gazette. But the second thing and the most important thing is it's a very narrow crime. It's only if you intentionally publish fake news. In other words, if you intend to deceive, you know it's false and yet you publish it. So it doesn't cover someone who innocently or frankly even negligently publishes something that happens to be wrong about COVID-19. That's the first thing. The second thing is the category of topics that it covers is very narrow. It's about COVID-19. It's about people who are infected with COVID-19, who have COVID-19 infections, and it's about the government's response to COVID-19. So it's a very narrow class of topics as well, all of which in the balance would probably mean that if this ever were to be tested in court, the court would lean over backwards to save the provision's constitutionality and to say the government was entitled to enact such a law.
Okay, in terms of the media with regards to media broadcasting house and other media houses and the 21-day national lockdown, how will this affect media in general?
Well, just as it affects everyone else, the lockdown means that generally the rule is people must stay at home. It's apparent that the media will be broadcast media, print media, etc., will be classified as essential services. When we see the regulations, the detail of which will come through shortly, but there's certainly been those reports. And SANEF, for example, has been in touch with the relevant government officials and made that statement in public. What that means is that those media professionals whose jobs involve covering the COVID-19 spread, the pandemic, government's measures, etc., and who therefore have to not be at home to do so, for example, to be at press conferences, to be speaking to people who are affected and so on, in order to cover this accurately, they will be entitled to do so. As to what the terms exactly will be of that, we don't know. We haven't yet seen the detail in the regulations which are coming today or tomorrow. But the media in general, those who are reporting on the disease, will not be restricted by the lockdown, it appears. We'll have to see the detail once those are promulgated.
Media houses also have other staff, that help to keep the stations running and the newspapers moving. Will those also apply to them?
Well, it seems to me that the analogy is with food supply, so that it's not just those who sell food, the supermarkets, who are allowed to be open and allowed to not be exempt from the rule that you must work from home or you must stay at home. But anyone who is part of that food chain to enable the food to get to the supermarkets so that people can go buy them, it seems to me that the same analogy would apply to the media. Having said that, most media companies these days have online activities, not just print activities. And to the extent that they're able to, it seems to me it would be prudent of media companies to seek to ensure that as many of their staff who can work from home or who must stay home are able to do so. And only those essential, either in the food chain by way of analogy, in the supply chain of the news, or of course those on the ground covering it, and who have to be on the ground. Only those are, in fact, the ones who are not staying at home.
Okay, in terms of the national lockdown, what do you foresee? Do you foresee that the police will be stopping people on the roads? Do you have an idea on how this is going to transpire?
No idea. We're in unprecedented territory, but it is clear that you can't have a law that isn't properly enforced and policed, because then it's a mockery. I think two things. One is that a lot of this depends upon citizens taking responsibility for their actions, because there's no way the police, the army, can enforce every single person's activities. For example, when you go and buy groceries at a shop, which you'll be entitled to do, and we'll see the detail of that, I'm sure, as well, in due course. So first point is that it depends a lot on our own responsibility as citizens to obey the law. I mean, the laws are sensible, they're there for a good reason, and it would be entirely irresponsible for anyone to deliberately break the laws. The second point is that, yes, there has to, however, be a mechanism to enforce the laws, and I'm not advocating by any means that people should be rounded up and arrested and so on, but there needs to be, first, an education campaign, as there is already starting to be. I think the government's done very well at communicating about this pandemic to the public, including these disaster regulations. And secondly, there needs to be an element of community trust, and we have to all pull together as a community. What that means in this context is that we must obey the lockdown, because it is there to save lives, and for no other reason.
And one last question with regards to fake news. How will this be controlled? How will it be monitored? And what's the criminal offense?
So the criminal offense is that if you deliberately publish fake news, in other words, you intend to deceive, you could face prosecution. The offense is 6 months or a period of or a fine, which and it could be a combination of both a fine and imprisonment. So it's a very serious offense. But as I say earlier, it's there to, I think, deter people who would otherwise go out to deliberately deceive. Because our right to freedom of expression doesn't protect those who engage in blatant lies, which are designed to deceive the public, and particularly in a crisis like this, where those kind of blatant lies can cause immense harm. I mean, postulate for the moment someone who creates a fake account purporting to be from the Minister of Health or the Deputy Minister, saying, we were wrong about the need to wash your hands repeatedly. You only need to wash your hands once a day, or something like that. That's the kind of fake news that has serious health consequences in this kind of environment. And in the world of deep fakes, where it is so easy to create a fake account or a fake document which appears, or a fake video which appears to be authentic, it's very difficult to police. But it seems to me, I'm not a fan at all of false news crimes at all, in general. Those kind of general vague laws against fake news and false news have been used in repressive regimes to lock up journalists and to stop critical reporting. So we've got to be very careful whenever we enact a fake news law. But it seems to me that given the specific context and given how narrow the offense is here, it's probably one of those exceptions which is justifiable.
And in terms of, let's say, our viewers, our young viewers, and everyone else that gets messages through WhatsApp, what advice can you give our viewers when they receive these messages?
Well, I think the most important thing is to interrogate the source of the information that we receive. This is a time, I don't think we interrogate the source of our information generally enough. But in particular, when you're dealing with a pandemic and you're dealing with panic, and you're trying to ensure that people remain calm, obey the science, obey the facts, listen to what the official sources say. It's a question of interrogating where you get that from. So does it come from the WHO? Does it come from the government? Does it come from the Minister of Health? Does it come from the National Institute of Communicable Diseases? Does it come from a reputable media company? Does it come from the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Guardian, the Daily Maverick, the Mail and Guardian, and so on? Can we trust it because of the source, and because the source is one that we genuinely can trust, because they genuinely have processes in place to ensure that before they press the button and release this information, they verify that they've taken steps to try and ensure, to the best of their ability, that it's accurate.
Okay.
As opposed to simply listening to any person rant on social media about what they think should happen. So it's about interrogating the source before you share, before you like, before you forward, retweet, because otherwise you're part of the problem. You might not be doing so deliberately, but if you are simply, without checking and without interrogating, forwarding anything you see that sounds interesting, then you may well actually be contributing to the difficulty that we are potentially having with fake news.
So in other words, it's the onus is upon the person who receives the message to basically watch out or be careful before they actually forward that message, and to make sure and ensure that it's from a reputable person.
Correct. That's exactly right.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dario, for your time.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and